We're often told that sports are the great equalizer, a neutral ground where politics stops at the locker room door and everyone's just there for the love of the game. But that's never been true. In the last quarter century, the lie has gotten much harder to hide. From the early days of colonial conquest to today's streaming era mega events, sports have always been tools of statecraft. They've been used to project power, manufacture legitimacy, reframe history, and deny colonial violence, all under the sound of a collective applause. From empire to capital, from the battlefield to broadcast, the game has never been just a game. The transition from colonialism to capitalism didn't remove the political functions of sports, it privatized it. And the postmodern era of global mega events has become the new arena for power competition, where prestige is performed and international influence is purchased with sponsorships, pageantry, and medals. Let's be clear, people love sports. That's why they work. The emotional pull is very real. But that's also why they're so dangerous, because when someone so beloved becomes a vehicle for politics, the politics become unassailable. Criticize the event and you're not just a dissenter, you're a killjoy, a traitor, someone who hates happiness itself. But what if that joy and what if that happiness was built on suffering? What if that pride was wholly manufactured? To understand what I'm talking about, start with the clearest case in modern history, the 1936 Berlin Olympics. Hitler used the games to present Nazi Germany as an orderly, modern, and legitimate state. The Olympic torch relay was invented to evoke classical grandeur. Swastikas hung next to Olympic flags. International journalists were welcomed with charm and stage-managed spectacle. Meanwhile, the groundwork for genocide was already in motion. It worked. The U.S. and other countries gladly participated. NBC broadcast highlights. The regime won medals, and more importantly, it bought time. The games didn't just sports wash the Nazi regime, they inoculated it. They gave it a symbolic credibility right before the descent into mass death. Now, fast forward to the postmodern world. The 2002 Salt Lake City post 9/11 Olympic Winter Games spectacle. Just 5 months after the Twin Towers fell, the U.S. hosted the Winter Olympics. The opening ceremonies featured a tattered American flag recovered from Ground Zero, carried by first responders. President George Bush stood among the athletes, and the message was unmistakable. The U.S. was wounded, but proud, united, and righteous as hell. The Games became an emotional theater of resilience, masking the fact that America was already waging a global war. Afghanistan had already been invaded, Iraq was being prepped, but through the Olympic lens, the U.S. wasn't a military aggressor. It was a beacon of courage. Then we had the 2008 Beijing Olympics, which was China's coming out party. It was a bid to show the world its infrastructure, its modernity, its global ambition. The games were architectural and a logistical triumph. But Western media didn't see it that way. In the lead up and during the games, the coverage was relentless. Tibet censorship, descendants, pollution. Some criticisms obviously were valid, but many were steeped in this xenophobic, paranoid, Orientalist trope. China was often framed not as a rising peer, but as this dystopian threat. Meanwhile, the U.S. continued to kill civilians in Iraq and Afghanistan with near zero Olympic scrutiny. The message was very clear. When China performs strength, it's authoritarian. When America does it, it's resilience. And then, if we go to the global south, we see Brazil. And in Brazil, the World Cup in 2014 and the Olympics in 2016 were supposed to mark Brazil's arrival as a global power. Instead, they marked the beginning of an internal collapse. Billions were spent on stadiums, infrastructure, and security. Public services were gutted to foot the bill. Promised legacies of tourism and development never really materialized. In fact, some of the stadiums became ghost structures. Rio declared a financial emergency before the Olympics opening ceremony. Mass protests had erupted in the years leading up to the 2014 World Cup. Corruption scandals exploded. Dilma Rousseff was impeached in 2016, and by 2018, Jair Bolsonaro rode the wave in an anti-elite rage all the way to the presidency. The games didn't just drain Brazil's budget, they delegitimized its democracy. And then in 2014, Russia and Vladimir Putin hosted the Sochi Winter Olympics. It was a $50 billion spectacle meant to showcase Russia's return to greatness. Days after the closing ceremony, Russia annexed Crimea. 4 years later, in 2018, still under sanctions, Russia hosted the FIFA World Cup. Protests were banned, Moscow was beautiful, and FIFA called it the best World Cup ever. Say what you will, but it worked. Russia got to reset its image on the world stage. And while the West wrung its hands, leaders still attended. Fans still cheered. The spectacle did what it was designed to do: rebrand. Then we go to Qatar, or somebody, as some people call it, Qatar. Qatar. It was the first Arab Muslim nation to host a World Cup. Qatar faced relentless scrutiny over migrant workers' death, LGBTQ repression, and state surveillance. Some critiques were warranted, but many ignored the broader geopolitical picture. Where was this outrage about Saudi Arabia? America's closest partner in the region, a kingdom that bombed Yemen into famine, murdered journalist Jamal Khashoggi, had just been buying its way into the geopolitical landscape by way of sports washing. Vision 2030 is Saudi Arabia's state-sponsored rebrand. They've acquired English football clubs, they've bankrolled professional golf leagues, hosted World Wrestling Entertainment events, and even hold a small stake in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. They're likely going to host the 2034 World Cup. Their sovereign wealth fund now touches almost every Western league. Yet, the West stays quiet. The same commentators who shouted down the Qataris barely mention Saudi Arabia. Why? Because Saudi money is everywhere. Newcastle United fans now cheer for the same flag that funds airstrikes in Yemen. UFC fans roar as MBS cuts ribbon deals with Dana White. This is the capitalism of soft power. The same transformation applies to corporations. Fossil fuel giants like Aramco and Shell now sponsor Formula One, tennis tournaments, and even the Women's World Cup. They paint themselves green while cooking the planet to charcoal. We call this greenwashing. When it intersects with sports, it becomes sports washing. Even states that don't even host events get in on it. American police departments hold press conferences in NFL jerseys. Canadian soldiers drop the puck on the military appreciation nights. Nationalism and corporate branding blur until there's no distinction between the flag, the franchise, and ultimately the pipeline. None of this is accidental. It's strategic. Sports are one of the last spaces where people gather emotionally. They're powerful because they don't feel political. Not until you look just a little bit closer. So where does that leave us? Not with cynicism, not with some demand to boycott joy, but with clarity. Because sports doesn't just reflect culture, it reshapes it. It naturalizes hierarchies. It rehearses the national mythology. It determines who belongs, who wins, and who gets erased. So the next time a billionaire buys a team, or a regime hosts a tournament, or an authoritarian leader walks out to thunderous applause, don't just ask who's winning. Ask who wrote the rules, and why are we still playing by them?